I didn't expect a routine repair to rearrange my life, but that's how these things happen, quietly, without spectacle, disguised as something harmless. I was still with Daniel then, still telling myself that comfort was enough, that stability could substitute for closeness. On the drive to the garage that afternoon, I rehearsed the usual thoughts: get the car fixed, go home, cook dinner, listen to Daniel talk about his day while mine folded in on itself. Nothing about the plan suggested change. The shop sat at the edge of town, a low building with peeling paint and the smell of oil that lingered like a memory. That was where I met Lucas Reed. He didn't announce himself with charm or confidence, he just wiped his hands on a rag and asked what seemed wrong with the engine. His voice was calm, unhurried, as if time obeyed him. I told him about the stalling, the noise I couldn't name. He listened without interrupting, nodding as though the problem mattered because I did. Daniel would have joked about it, offered a fix he didn't believe in, moved on. Lucas didn't. He asked a few questions, popped the hood, and leaned in with a focus that felt rare. Watching him work, I felt something loosen in my chest, not attraction, not yet, just relief at being taken seriously. While he checked the engine, he asked about my day. It was a simple question, but it caught me off guard. I gave a careful answer, trimmed of emotion, and he accepted it without pressing. When he finished, he explained the issue in plain terms, patient enough to repeat himself when I asked questions that probably sounded foolish. I paid, thanked him, and left with the odd sense that something had been exchanged beyond money. That I came back a week later for a follow-up. Lucas remembered my name. That shouldn't have mattered, but it did. He asked if the car was running better and whether I'd made it to the coast like I'd mentioned in passing. Daniel hadn't remembered that plan, he'd been distracted by a deadline. I told Lucas the trip never happened. He didn't ask why. He just nodded, as if he understood how plans dissolve when no one holds them steady. Friendship arrived in increments. A few extra minutes of conversation each visit. Coffee shared on the curb outside the shop while we waited for a part to arrive. He talked about growing up nearby, about fixing engines with his uncle after school, about how he liked the honesty of machines, how they broke for reasons you could trace. I told him about my job, about how Daniel and I had been together long enough to predict each other's reactions. I avoided words like stuck and lonely, but they hovered between us anyway. At home, Daniel noticed I seemed lighter, then later distracted. He asked if work was stressful. I said no. He kissed my cheek and returned to his phone. Our evenings fell into familiar shapes: dinner, television, sleep. Nothing was wrong, which made it harder to explain what felt missing. I didn't mention Lucas. I told myself there was nothing to mention, but I thought about the shop more than I needed to. About the way Lucas paused before answering, choosing words with care. About how he listened as if conversation were a craft. I noticed the sound of my own laughter when I was there, unforced, surprising. It unsettled me enough that I tried to pull back. I skipped a week, then another. The car didn't need anything, and neither did I insisted. When I finally went back, Lucas raised an eyebrow and asked if I'd abandoned him. It was a joke, gentle, but it landed close to the truth. We talked longer than usual. He asked about Daniel, and I answered honestly for the first time, that we were fine, that fine was complicated, that I didn't know what I wanted beyond not feeling invisible. Lucas didn't offer advice. He said, "That sounds heavy," and let the silence do its work. That it was then he mentioned that he taught people the basics when they were curious: how to change oil, read an engine, understand what was happening under the hood. He said it casually, as if offering directions. "If you ever want to learn," he added, "you're welcome to hang around after closing." The invitation sat between us, unassuming and dangerous. I imagined telling Daniel, imagined the questions that would follow, the explanations that would feel disproportionate to the act. I also imagined the garage at dusk, the tools laid out with intention, Lucas's steady voice guiding my hands. I told myself it would be practical, harmless. Learning a skill wasn't a betrayal. That I didn't answer right away. I said I'd think about it. Lucas smiled, the kind of smile that didn't demand a response. On the drive home, the car ran smoothly, but my thoughts didn't. I loved Daniel in the way you love a place you've lived too long, grateful for shelter but restless for air. I didn't know what I was moving toward, only that standing still had begun to feel like its own kind of choice. That night, Daniel fell asleep with the television still on. I lay awake, replaying the day, measuring my silence. By morning, the decision had formed without ceremony. I texted Lucas that I'd like to learn, if the offer still stood. He replied a few minutes later, anytime. After 6 works. I put the phone down and felt the weight of the path opening in front of me, quiet, unmarked, and already changing the way I understood where I was headed. The first evening I stayed after 6, the garage felt different, stripped of its daytime noise. The doors were half lowered, the air cooler, the radio low enough to fade into the background. Lucas handed me a pair of gloves and pointed to the engine we'd be working on, explaining each step before I touched anything. He spoke with the same calm precision I'd come to recognize, but there was a softness there too, an ease that made the space feel shared rather than instructional. He showed me how to listen, to distinguish a healthy hum from a strained rattle. When I made a mistake, he corrected me without embarrassment, guiding my hands away from a bolt tightened the wrong way. The closeness was incidental, practical, yet my attention snagged on it all the same. I told myself it was concentration, that learning something new sharpened every sense. Lucas didn't linger. He stepped back when the lesson ended, wiped his hands, and asked if I wanted coffee. We sat on overturned crates, steam rising from paper cups. Conversation flowed without effort, but it stayed measured, respectful. He asked about Daniel again, and this time I didn't minimize. I said we were drifting, that we spoke less even when we were together. Lucas listened, eyes steady, as if he were holding a fragile part of the story with care. When he spoke, he didn't compare or judge. He said distance could be quiet and still hurt. I felt seen in a way that startled me. The nights became a pattern. After work, I went home, told Daniel I had plans to learn something useful, kissed him goodbye, and returned to the garage. Daniel encouraged me, pleased I'd found a hobby. His trust pressed against my ribs like a reminder. At the shop, Lucas taught me systems, fuel, air, timing, and I taught him, without intending to, the corners of myself I'd kept folded. He learned my tells, the way I deflected with humor, the pause before I admitted fear. I learned his too, the brief smile when something mattered, the way he avoided talking about his own loneliness. Nothing crossed a line I could name, and yet the line moved. I began to measure my days by those evenings. When Lucas texted to cancel once, apologizing for an unexpected repair, disappointment flared sharper than it should have. I recognized it immediately and tried to smother it with reason. This was friendship. This was learning. Anything else was a story I was inventing because my life needed texture. Daniel noticed the change before I did. One night, as we cleared the table, he asked if I was happy. The question landed heavier than accusation. I said yes too quickly, then amended it to something softer, more honest, that I was trying to be. He nodded, reached for my hand, and suggested a weekend away. I agreed, already calculating how it would disrupt the routine I hadn't admitted mattered. At the garage the next evening, Lucas sensed the shift. I was distracted, my attention slipping. He asked what was wrong, and the truth crowded my throat. I told him about Daniel's question, about the weekend plan, about the guilt that had begun to track me like a shadow. Lucas leaned against the workbench, considering. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. "But you owe yourself clarity." The word lingered between us, heavier than any confession. I realized then how much I wanted his understanding, how much his opinion had come to weigh. That recognition scared me. I stepped back, created space where I could, focusing on the work until my hands steadied. When we finished, Lucas didn't offer coffee. He thanked me for the help and said he'd see me next time, if I wanted. I went home unsettled. Daniel was already asleep, his phone on the nightstand, a reminder of all the small ways we'd learned to coexist without colliding. I lay beside him, awake, listening to his breathing, aware that I was holding two truths that didn't reconcile. I wanted the life I'd built, and I wanted the way I felt when Lucas listened. I told myself wanting wasn't the same as choosing. The weekend away was pleasant, almost convincing. Daniel and I walked along the shore, talked about plans we'd postponed. He held my hand with a familiarity that used to comfort me. I smiled when I should have, laughed at the right moments, and felt the absence of the garage like a missing note in a song. On the drive back, Daniel asked if we were okay. I said we were working on it. The answer satisfied him. It didn't satisfy me. When I returned to the shop the following week, Lucas looked relieved and guarded all at once. We worked in silence longer than usual, the space between us deliberate. Eventually, he asked how the weekend went. I said it was good. He nodded, accepting the boundary I'd drawn. The restraint was kind, and it hurt more than closeness would have. As we cleaned up, Lucas paused, then spoke with care. If this ever feels like too much, he said, we can stop. I don't want to be the place you run to without knowing why. His honesty steadied me. I realized that whatever this was, it mattered because it asked something of me: attention, integrity, choice. That I left the garage that night without answers, but with a clarity I couldn't ignore. I was already standing in the middle of a decision, whether I named it or not. The path ahead remained quiet and unmarked, but I knew now that continuing meant consequence. I drove home slowly, the engine's hum even and reliable, wondering how long a heart could pretend it wasn't being tuned towards something new.